Okay, we're in Shulchan Aruch Kazayin. This halacha really has three inyan to it. We're going to do one of them. Okay, meducha, muteres b'hagola, something that you use for grinding, in this case spices. It's mutter, you could do hagola to it. The Mechaber says, if it's so big that you can't fit into a bigger pot to do hagola to it, then mason b'mayim moischem, then you pour hot water into this grinder. You put into it a hot rock into it. The hot water will go all over the edges. If you do like that, it's considered like a kliyushin. We can get back to this in a second. The Ramos says some people hold that the meducha needs libun.
This is not the pounder, it's the bucket.
The bucket, yeah. Well, it's both. The same for both. Okay, so the Ramos says that if someone holds that you have to do libun to it, this is one of the parts we're not going to do. Okay, in halacha chaf beis is really the shaila. If there's about a base, but it's the same question. I'm going to leave it for there as to why some people hold you need libun for this. What should be the reason for libun? So we'll leave that for now. But the Ramos says libun kolduhu. But if you do libun, what we call libun kal, the hainish yisrof Allah of Kashering b'chutz sagdi. If you do libun kal, that's good enough. And the reason for that is, okay, let me just finish what he says. The noigin l'labna l'chatchila, and the minig is that l'chatchila to do libun, to do this libun kal. Miyu sagla b'hagolim aim b'dumas, but if it has no like little cracks and crevices in it, then you really could get away with hagola. Then you could do hagola. And so the Ramos is breaking it down. L'chatchila, there are those hold you should do libun. If you can't do libun, you should do libun kal, and you can't do libun kal, like in the case of here's wood, you're going to say in a second, you can't do libun kal, you do hagol. You could do hagol. If it's made out of wood, then obviously you can't do libun to it. But you have another problem. But if it's made out of wood, it's going to have little cracks and bumps and holes in it. So then yesh l'kalfa b'klei umnis, the chashirim l'kumas. So you should scrape off a layer with some kind of a tool made for that. So you got rid of the shilas at the end and the cracks and crevices, and then then you do hagol to it. Okay, you can't leave them to a piece of wood, obviously. So you get rid of the problem of the end by scraping off a little layer, and then you do hagol to it. Okay, so we mentioned this way back that there's a Prima Gadol says that we know there's a machlokes whether what we call libun kal is really libun. There's a machlokes who says that that's considered libun, even though the Gemara says you need what we call libun. He says libun kal, that's really the din, that's what you have to do. So when we're being machmir to do libun, you can get away with libun kal. We make a tier. We say if it's only a chumrah to do libun, then you could be samachan like that this is considered libun. So in a case like this, by this meducha, the Rama says min hadin hagol is what you need. It's a chumrah that you should try to do libun. So what you do is you try to do as much as you can, and as much as you can means do libun kal, because some hold that's even libun. If it's not possible, like if it's made out of wood, you can't possibly do hagola, or there's other cases that you just can't do libun to it. So then you get away with hagola, because min hadin you can do hagola. I mean, we don't say min hadin you can do hagola, so do hagola. You say min hadin you can do hagola, try to do libun kal, because that potentially is libun. According to Hagoy's mind, that's libun. So you're trying to sort of like hop around another shita. That's how the Prima Gadol explains this and other dinim like that. This din. So we're not talking about this part, which is the chaf beis, about why it should possibly need libun. I'm putting it on the side. And then there's another side which we're also not talking about, which is Mishbu talks about more than the Mechaber, which is where's the chametz over here? What's chametz stick over here? What do you grind in a grinder? You grind spices, or you chop up meat. Where's the chametz over here? So the chametz, that's the potential for chametz over here is that maybe you ground it together with bread, like you made breadcrumbs together with the spices, or by mistake bread fell into this. Okay, and that's his own trial. We're not talking about. Maybe we'll do it next week, or maybe we'll just completely skip it. Is the thing that you're grinding? Okay, well, I'm going to point out another thing. This halacha is the first of a few halachas about things that are used cold that need more than just cleaning. Okay, that's going to be the next bunch of halachas. Things that seemingly are used cold that might need more than are just plain wiping it off. Okay, so this is an example. Now, why does it need anything more than just wiping it off? So it has to do with the davar charav and things like that. But why did the davar charav and the duchah the sakina is on the non-chametz things that are here? What's getting ground up? You're grounding up spices. So Or if you grind the bread, it's not a double charif. So why in the world are you kashering because of a double charif when the charif is not the isser? It's charif and there's isser, and they're not the same thing. So watch it. Okay, so that's, maybe we'll do it next week, or we'll just ignore it. But that's a separate child. The Mishnah talks more about this than the Mechaber does. So the Mechaber are assuming that you understand why you have to kasher it, but it doesn't really. We don't hear it. The thing that's charif is not the thing that's isser. Okay, so we'll put that on the side. What we will talk about it. I won't be long, which is this idea that the Mechaber says that since you can't do hagala to it because it doesn't fit into a pot, so what you should do is pour water from a different pot into it and then put the hot rocks into it to make it to be like a klivishon. The Mechaber's words even are the chol ki agav nahave hagala the klivishon. If you do it like this with the evan melubenes, it becomes like a klivishon. So that din is here. This is one case where it says this idea to use an evan melubenes, and at the end of Taf Nun Beis, it says, which is a Gemara, that the Gemara talks about what happens if you have a pot that's so big you can't fit it into another pot. So how are you going to do hagala to it? So you fill it up with water. And the Gemara says, how are you going to get water to kasher the rim of the pot? How are you going to get to fill up so high? So the thing over there says that you could fill the pot as much as you can, and then you take a hot rock and you drop it in, and that will make the water overflow, and the water will then be hitting over the rim of the pot. So that's the case of Emul Benes over there at the end of Taf Nun Beis, the same kind of it. And there's a subtle difference between that case and this case. In that case, which should I do first? In that case, the pot is a klivishon. It's sitting on the pipe. The Emul Benes is just a way to get the water to spread to certain parts. You need water in certain other spots. So the way the Mishnah says it is, you have to put in a hot rock, because if you put in a cold one, it's going to cool the water down. The water won't be hot enough for hagala. So you need a hot rock, so the hot will not ruin your klivishon. But it is a klivishon. It's sitting cooking on the fire. You're kashering with it. So the rock has to be just not cold so that it won't ruin it. Right. It doesn't have to be. It just has to be. The Mishnah doesn't have to. If it would be cold, then it's going to cool down. It doesn't have to. It can't be colder than the water. Exactly. In our case, we have a thing that's a grinder. It's not on the fire. But there's not a thing that goes on the fire. Even in one case, the Rambam says it's wood. So there, the hot rock has to create a klivishon. The hot rock is going to say, this can't just be as hot as the water is. Okay, this has got to be very hot to make this into a klivishon. Okay, so these two cases are not...
how is it going to make a klivishon?
And the answer, okay, that's exactly where I'm coming to. That's the next step, which is, I think it's the gross size, but that's where it comes from, which is that the reason why something is not a klivishon, but something is only irui or klisheni is because it's defined from the Kashrus. So you got to have this rock has to be enough to help overcome the defiance of Kashrus. The rock is gonna add so much heat to this. It's like you're making it into klivishon. And making it like right. And what people do, people use this sort of idea when they'll do is they'll put something filled with water and they'll run a steam line into it also. It'll be boiling water and the steam line into it to help boost it to a klivishon.
Over there in the Makora. It's Kashrus.
He did what?
They want to make a klivishon into klivishon. I got a klivishon.
Okay.
Then it's over good. So put a steam line in it.
Okay, so people do. Okay, so there are things like that you could do to try to. This is here with the matter with the rock, but you're trying to boost it by making it to try to take this rock should overcome the defiance of Kashrus and turn it into a klivishon. Okay.
That's what people do by the sink and Pesach. They want to do over there.
Correct. Now that's actually coming in a while. That's right. That's correct. The same kind of idea. Okay. So now, if I just told that if you use this rock, you're going to overcome the defiance of Kashrus, so you would say, so then it really makes it into a klivishon. Right? The words of the Mechaber really are the chol ki agav nahave hagala the klivishon. Okay. But that's what the Mechaber. Those are the words are. But the truth is, the Bir Halacha brings. And back in Halacha Vav, there was a bunch of Achronim there, and in your day also a bunch of Achronim who says this stuff is not a real klivishon. Okay, it's close. It gets rid of the defiance of Kashrus, but this is not a real klivishon. It's close to a klivishon. If you want a real klivishon, you got to put it onto the fire like the way you're supposed to. Just throwing in a hot rock is not going to do it. Now I can't say that when you put a steam line. Maybe if you really want a steam line into it, then it really is a klivishon. We might look at the steam as an eish. We might say that this is something that just keeps on exuding heat.
Yeah, no way. You cook a kettle with steam.
Right. Well, the reason why it's a klivishon is because the fire just keeps on pumping out more heat into this thing. The steam line just keeps on putting in more steam. It's opposed to the rock. Whatever's there is there, and when it's used up, it's gone. I mean, it only has X amount of heat into it.
You said you weren't sure. I mean, we would say a kettle, but
we would assume that. But of course, there's in betweens, because there are people who have a pot full of boiling water and then put in the steam line for 30 seconds. So you have to know how much it was in there to make it into cleavage. Okay, yeah, but that's right. A steam line is better than these kind of things. But the beer
the water is just 212. It's 212, right? No, but
no, not for the finest Makaros. Okay, so the beer halacha brings it over here from some achronim, and
the fan from the outside will be 212. If you can measure the temperature of the outside of the fan.
Then what?
The fans themselves are 212.
Okay, then
it cannot be makar of the water.
Okay, so you think that at that point it should be overcome? We've passed cliche and now up to a cleavage. Okay. So you would think like that, and in fact we talked about that. Rabbi Belsky says that that's what you could do. Okay, but we said then, and this is the same point here that I'm making here, that the Taz says. It's not true. The Taz says even if you overcome the finest makaros by doing what he calls an extended irui, you keep on pouring water on the thing, pouring until there's no more the finest makaros. The Taz says that's fine for cases like ours, where it's not really a cleavation. It's just a double charav make like a cleavation. We're gonna have the next bunch of halachas. We're gonna keep having cases that it's not a cleavation, but it's sort of like a cleavation. Anything that's like sort of a cleavation, a double gush. Things that are sort of a cleavation, if you want, you can overcome it by Evan Benes, and overcoming the finest makaros makes it not a cleavation. But to go to the next step and say, I think that was a real cleavation. Okay, a spray dryer. Is a spray dryer a cleavation? It's a real. You want to answer?
On the line. You want me to just tell him to call back?
Yes. It's a real a spray dryer is a real good old-fashioned cleavation. Okay, at least it's not even more than that. So then to say that I'm going to do extended irui to make that into a cleavation, that's a whole other step. It only says it over here. By here, the rock, it's cold, and just because it's a double charav, and we can have it later by a double gush, and other kinds of cases like that. So all for those kind of cases where it's like an almost cleavation, good. Then that's what I say. Then you could do is this thing when you overcome the finest makaros, you've turned it into a cleavation. But it's a jump to say that you should be able to do it by a real cleavation, and the Taz says not like that. The Taz says don't do it. So okay, we talked about this once before. Okay, now there's a deal. I think it's a deal. The Mishnah Berurah, I think, makes this deal that the Mechaber is really saying what those achronim are saying, because the Mechaber says you have this grinder. If it's so big that you can't get it into a big pot, then use an Evan Benes. The Mishnah Berurah says, and he means to say is, if it would be smaller, then you can't get away with using an Evan Benes. Evan Benes is only when you're stuck. When you can't do a real cleavation, then you can do an Evan Benes, assuming that it works. But what happens if it would have been a small pot? Mishnah Berurah says, no, you can't get away with that. You have to actually put it into a real cleavation then. Okay, so I'm saying then it's a diak in the Mechaber that he agrees with what these achronim are saying, which is Evan Benes is close to a cleavation, but it's not as good as a cleavation. If you have an option to do a real cleavation, then he expects you to do it. That's what he wants you to do. So it's a diak in the Mechaber. I don't know if it is or not. The next words in the Mechaber are the Chol Tigadu have a go to cleavation. Yeah, but that's a diak in the Mechaber that is the two sentences. Now, there's another place where this thing of Evan Benes comes up. We had it here, and at the end of the top place, there's a third place, okay, which is in Hilchos Klei Yayin. You want to kasher a barrel that had kavush of stam yayin. So it says, in the beginning of the siman, it says the regular ways to do it. At the end of the siman, it says that there's such an eitzah that you could pour hot water into the barrel and then roll the barrel around, and that's considered a kasher. Okay? And the Ramah says, don't do it. You shouldn't be samach on that. Just pouring the water in, and the reason we would say is because it's irui cleavation, which is nistachat kiluach. Because you pour some water into the barrel, and then you roll the barrel around to get the water all around. So it's like a it's like a cleavation, right? I'm saying you pour the cleavation in, you pour the irui cleavation, but that only hits in one part of it. Then you roll it around to get all the sides. So it's like a cliche. That's not good enough. Okay?
So what's mystical, right?
Right. It's right. It's beyond mystical. It's a holding by cliche anyway. So what you should do is before you start rolling it around, put in the Evan Benes, or pour the water in together with this Evan Benes, and then, now when you roll it around, that'll be a good kasher. Okay? That's going to make it into a good kasher. So, he says over here, you can do it. So the shaila is, when you do that, is that bumping it up to being a cleavation? Are you, by putting those hot rocks together with it, are you making it now like a cleavation? Or is putting in those rocks just making it into irui cleavation? And that's good enough. Well, what do I care? Why am I asking this question? Who cares? What makes it irui cleavation or cleavation? The shaila is, What happens if you don't want to roll it around with the Evan Lubenis? What happens if you want to do just Ivri? But not Ivri the way the Ramah describes it. You pour it in and then you roll it around. I'm going to do Ivri on every single spot. I'll do a real Ivri Klivishan on every spot. I don't want to make it into a Klivishan. Can I get away with Kashering that Kli with Ivri in every spot instead of this Klivishan? If you tell me that the rocks over there make it into a Klivishan, then Ivri is not good enough. And if you tell me that no, the rocks are just bouncing up to being a Klivishan, bumping up to being a Klivishan, to Ivri Klivishan, then I can get away with Ivri Klivishan. Okay, and it's a very negay shayla. We talked about it. We're going to really come to this soon. Kavush, you have to do regular hagala for. There's the shach. There's a special kula that after kavush of stam yayin or cholav or basar or chametz, there's a special kula you'll have to do a lower level of kashering. Okay, you can do a lower level of kashering. This is reasonably common either with cholav, like a milk tank or grape juice tank, that they might not be strong enough to do a real hagol, or it might even be physically possible to do a real hagol of a klivishin, but you want to do either klivishin. So when the Ramah says that you should pour in the water and then throw in the rocks and roll it around, is that now it's Ivri? And so in other words, you could do Ivri to the Kli, Ivri klivishin is good enough, or does he mean that, like in our case, that the Evan Lubenis makes it like real klivishin, and that you have to do that to kasher the Kli? So, the Ramah comes from a Isra Heter. That idea of throwing the Evan Lubenis comes from Isra Heter. And if you look in the Isra Heter, you'll see he says, this is what you have to do, and don't do Ivri klivishin. Don't go and pour the water on every spot. That's not good enough to kasher this Kli. Okay? If you look at the Isra Heter, that's what he says. So, then you would say that means the Isra Heter is trying to tell you that this with the rocks makes it into a real klivishin, like Artin says. Just doing Ivri klivishin is not good enough. It's in the Isra Heter. Okay, that's how you would think if you looked at it just like that. But the truth is that you could question it. This is Rabbi Shechter's point, which is, if you look, I think it's like 30 halachas before him in the Isra Heter, he says a kli that was belay idei Ivri has to be kasher in the klivishin. There's no such thing as kasher with Ivri klivishin. So, and then this halacha references you back to there and says since you're never allowed to kasher with Ivri klivishin, therefore in this barrel you can't kasher with Ivri klivishin either. You have to kasher with water together with the rocks. Okay, so when he's saying this shita that you can't use Ivri klivishin, it's not because he holds that the rocks don't make it into Ivri klivishin. He just holds you're never allowed to do Ivri klivishin. There's no such thing as kasher with Ivri klivishin. Rabbi Shachar is fine. That's what he holds. We don't pass like that. We pass if the bleed happens through Ivri kasher. We don't hold like that. Other Isra Heter. So we can also hold that you can kasher with Ivri klivishin. And he brings there's a riot from the din. It says if you take off a klipas worth of the kli, then you kasher it. By these barrels, if you take off a klipas worth of the kli, that's considered as kasher. So you said, you just have to get off the klipas, so you could do Ivri also. Okay, so we could just question it. I'm just going to leave a question. I'm getting too involved in that din. You could question it because the fact that if you take off a k'dei klipa, when you scrape off a k'dei klipa's worth of the kli, you for sure get the bli out of that k'dei klipa. There's no questions about that. The bli went in k'dei klipa, by scraping off a k'dei klipa's worth of the kli, you for sure get the bli off. It's gone. The kli doesn't exist anymore. But if you do Ivri klivishin, how do you know you got to add the bli? It's a chumrah to say that Ivri is mavliya k'dei klipa. That's not a din. That's a chumrah. We don't know whether it is or is not mavliya. So we say, if the bli happened like the Ivri, you take it out like the Ivri. Because the Manoshach, if it went in, then it can come out also. But if the bli went in through kavush, and we know the bli went in k'dei klipa, who says you could get the bli out through Ivri, which might not work? Ivri might be nothing. Ivri klivishin might be zero. Might be have no blias at all. So how are you going to say that if I did Ivri klivishin, I got out k'dei klipa? So I'm saying, in Kuf Lamed Hey it says, if you scrape off a k'dei klipa, you got the bli out, because that's as much as kavush goes in for wine. No one goes in k'dei klipa. Okay, and that says another thing. If you roll water around with the rocks in it, you can also kasher it. So you say, well, maybe that means Ivri. I don't know. The makar to that din is an Isra Heter. The Isra Heter, for his own private reasons, doesn't hold that you can do Ivri. We know the Isra Heter holds you cannot. We don't hold like the Isra Heter's private reasons. But what's the raya that you can do Ivri klivishin at all on these kelim? It doesn't come from, the fact that you could scrape it off doesn't prove you could do Ivri. Because scraping it off is for sure removing the bli, and Ivri might not remove any bli at all. And the case of the rolling of rocks around in the water, the Isra Heter says that's like a cleavage, and that's not an Ivri cleavage. He, for his own personal reasons,
we hold Ivri don't do k'dei klipa.
we hold it's a chumrah, we say it's beleg the klipa, maybe it's beleg the klipa, and if it's beleg, then it could take it out also. That's not for sure that it can do that. That's a chumrah to say that even if things are not in cleavage, they could have a bli also.
Maybe like the other Rishonim, it doesn't work at all.
Yeah, maybe it's a zero. So in cases when the bli happens through Iri, good. So if no bli went in, then I don't have to take any bli out either. Who cares? I didn't lose anything. But here I know bli went in because it went in through coverage. And the coverage of Samyan goes into Ktei Klipa. So if I scraped off a Ktei Klipa, I know I got it out. If I did Iri, I don't know if I do Iri, I got it out. So you say, well, you see, he says you could roll it around. But he says, no, the Isvet says you can roll around to make it into cleavation. Which first of all, in our din it says that rolling the Evel Benes makes it a cleavation, and the Isvet Heter himself personally holds it has to do that, because he has this personal shita that Iri never works. That's his own personal shita. But something there's no makar then to say that Iri cleavation should work with it. I'm not saying so. I'm saying it doesn't. We don't see a clear makar. There's the two things that talk about it. Neither of them say you can do Iri. One says you can do scraping, and one says you can do what the makar for that thing is called a cleavation, or when we see an art is cleavation. So allowing you to do Iri is more questionable. Okay, of course, the extended Iri would for sure work. Okay, that's an example. That case of coverage is an example like ours, where if you do an extended Iri, you've overcome the Defanas Makaras, and there everyone's going to agree that overcoming the Defanas Makaras is going to work. The Achronim who argue just say don't do it when you need a real cleavation. Anytime you need less than like a cold kind of a wheel like that, like a coverage, then everyone agrees that overcoming the Defanas Makaras is a trick. I'm not, so you could do an extended Iru and get over it, which usually you do anyhow. Usually if you do an Iru on a tank, you run through a spray bowl, you're overcoming the Defanas Makaras anyhow. I'm saying, but just the musad that you could do Iru cleavation, so that based on that, it's a heter, that's not such a clear thing.